Starting things off, number 10, we have Robert Elton Harris. He said, "You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everyone dances with the Grim Reaper." He was arrested on July 5th of 1978 when him and his brother hijacked a car with 2 teenage boys in it. They ordered them to drive to a remote location where the brothers brutally murdered them, and then they used the vehicle as a getaway car when they robbed a San Diego bank. Robert Harris was arrested just 1 hour after the robbery, and he was charged with murder and auto theft, kidnapping, burglary, and bank robbery. One of the arresting officers was the father of one of the murdered boys, but he didn't realize that the victim was his son until later. He wasn't even able to recognize his son's face. That's how violent the murder was. Robert Harris was sentenced to death in 1979. After many appeals, he was finally executed in San Quentin's gas chamber on April 21st, 1992. Moving up this list with George Engel in at number 9. He was an anarchist who didn't like to follow any sort of rules or regulations. He was involved with a lot of activism and protests in the Chicago area. A protest bombing took place in Haymarket Square in Chicago that resulted in the death of 7 police officers, 4 civilians, and a lot of other people who were seriously injured. George Engel was actually at home playing cards while this riot broke out, and he was arrested the next day and charged with conspiracy in the bombings. He was convicted and sentenced to hanging, but before he took his last breath, he said, "Hurrah for anarchy. This is the happiest moment of my life." Roger Keith Coleman makes his last statement in at number 8. His case gained nationwide attention and major controversy because he maintained his innocence the whole time during his conviction and even right before he was executed. During his final last words, he said, "An innocent man is going to be murdered tonight. When my innocence is proven, I hope Americans will realize the injustice of the death penalty as all other civilized countries have." He was convicted in Virginia for assaulting and murdering his sister-in-law on the day that he has been laid off from work. After his death, the DNA evidence was reanalyzed, and in January 2006, the governor announced that the testing of the DNA evidence has conclusively proven that he was guilty of the crime. Okay, that's great and all, but why don't you think you should have done 1,000 tests on the DNA before you executed him? It makes no sense. What if the DNA evidence proved that he wasn't guilty? What would the press conference look like then? Oops, we made a massive mistake and killed an innocent man. My bad. And now at number 7, we have Timothy McVeigh. He infamously said, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." If you guys remember, he was the one behind the Oklahoma City bombing, which killed 168 people and injured over 680 others. This bombing is actually the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the United States. His execution date was set for June 11, 2001, and he made a request to have it publicly televised, but this motion was denied. He invited a composer to perform classical music on the night of his execution, and he requested to have a Catholic chaplain. He also requested 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream as his last meal. He was executed by lethal injection, and his wait to be executed was way shorter than most inmates waiting on death row. He only spent about 4 years on death row, while most inmates spend an average of 15 years. The infamous Jeffrey Dahmer is next up at number 6. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms for murdering 17 men and boys in the Milwaukee area, and this is between 1978 and 1991. He was also heavily into necrophilia, and he kept his victims' body parts in the freezer so that he can just eat them later. The interesting part of this story is that Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't given the death penalty. His inmate actually beat him to death because he said that Jeffrey Dahmer was a sick and creepy man. And yeah, he was. He used to make this person food look like human body parts, and he would cover them in ketchup to resemble blood. So according to Jeffrey Dahmer's murderer, his last words were, "I don't care if I live or die, go ahead and kill me." And now at number 5, we have Tom Blackjack Ketchum. He was an outlawed cowboy who murdered someone in 1895. After that, his gang fled to New Mexico, where they committed more robberies before he was captured during an unsuccessful attempt to rob a train. He was quickly arrested, put on trial, found guilty, and sentenced to death by hanging. When his execution date arrived, it was the biggest public display in the area because he was the first person to be hanged for a train robbery in New Mexico. However, things didn't go as smoothly as they hoped. Before he was hanged, he said this: "I'll be in hell before you start breakfast, boys, let her rip." And right after that, he said the rope completely decapitated him, and it is said that his headless body landed on its feet and stayed standing upright for quite some time. John Wayne Gacy had 3 famous last words, and this comes into number 4. He kept it short and sweet when he said, "Kiss my ass." I don't know about you guys, but I think I would have, a lot more to say for my final words than "kiss my ass." But then again, he was a textbook serial killer who didn't really have any emotions. He was known as the Killer Clown because he used to dress up as Pogo the Clown and perform at many charitable events and birthday parties. He took the lives of at least 33 young boys in Illinois, and he would bury their bodies underneath his home. So when he was convicted of sexual assault in 1968, the police were able to find all of the dead bodies that he tried to cover up. Despite a bunch of corpses being found underneath his own home, he maintained his innocence. But he was found guilty in 1980 because there was just so much compelling evidence against him. He was given multiple death penalties and life sentences, and finally, after being on death row for 14 years, he was executed by lethal injection. Aileen Wuornos is up next at number 3. Aileen had a terrible childhood that was full of abuse and abandonment, so it's almost no surprise that she went on a killing rampage that would define her as America's most infamous female serial killer. She worked as a prostitute, and she killed 7 men that picked her up along the highway. Aileen said that all of her murderers were out of self-defense, but she was also convicted and sentenced to death for 6 of the murders. She was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002, but before she died, she said this: "I just like to say I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June the 6th. Like the movie, big mothership of all, I'll be back." I don't even know what this even means, but I am pretty scared. And June 6th, what happens on June 6th? Carl Panzram's last words makes it onto this list at number 2. You probably don't recognize his name, but he is actually known as one of the most sadistic American serial killers of all time. He had more than a dozen aliases, and no one knew anything about what he has done for years until he was captured in November 1928. Before his death, he confessed to killing 21 people and sexually harming 1,000 males. Is this real life right now? And right before he was hanged, he said, "In my lifetime, I have murdered 21 human beings. I have committed thousands of burglaries, robberies, larcenies, arsons, and last but not least, I have committed sodomy on more than 1,000 male human beings." That is just sickening, and for all those reasons, I'm not the least bit sorry for this guy. The Vampire of Dusseldorf falls onto our list at number 1. He is known as a vampire because he would occasionally attempt to drink the blood from his victims' wounds while they were still alive. But eventually he was arrested and sentenced to death by beheading because he committed a series of murders and sexual assaults. He even admitted to killing a 9-year-old girl. It is confirmed that he murdered at least 9 people, but the police suspected that he brutally murdered a lot more people. So one evening before his death, he ordered a Wiener Schnitzel, a bottle of white wine, and fried potatoes, and the next morning he was taken to the guillotine to have his head chopped off. But before he left this world, he made one last scary statement that probably haunted the people that were at his execution. He said, "Tell me, after my head has been chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my head? That would be a pleasure to end all pleasures." I mean, yeah, after hearing that, I'm definitely gonna have nightmares, and if that wasn't enough, his mummified head is on display right now in a Wisconsin museum after doctors tried to cut it open to find reasons behind his evil. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have James D. French. He was an American criminal, actually the last person to be executed under Oklahoma's death penalty. He was serving life in prison, but allegedly was too afraid to commit suicide, and so he murdered his own cellmate hoping to get the death penalty, which he did. When James French was strapped into the electric chair and asked for his last words, he supposedly asked those around him, "How's this for a headline? French fries." So yeah, his name, once again, was James French. Electric chair, French fries. Some people find that funny, some find it shocking, some people just don't know what to make of it. What do you guys think? Next up at number 9 now, we have Oscar Wilde. This Irish poet and playwright was known for his biting wit and conversational skill. He seemed to have a quote for every occasion and remains one of the most quoted famous people in history. It seems only fitting then that his last words were some of his most famous. While lying in bed and dying of cerebral meningitis, Oscar said, "My wallpaper and I are fighting a duel to the death. One or the other of us has to go." Coming in at number 8 now, we have time. I found this one on Reddit. It came from a Reddit user called Guy with Crazy Ideas, who said, "Grandma's last words to the nurse on duty was, 'Time is not what you think it is.' She kept repeating it over and over and then died. They pulled me aside when I arrived and told me how strange and alert her eyes were as she kept repeating the statement about time. I still wonder about this to this day." That's pretty heavy. What do you guys think she meant? Some people feel that when people are close to death, they begin to see around the veil of reality, of the universe as we know it, that they feel more connected to what is beyond or the lack thereof.
All of a sudden, Grandma looked so terrified. She grabbed my hand and told me she didn't want to go. So I said, "Well, can you see God or heaven or a light or anything?"
What did she say?
"No, there's nothing."
Maybe the grandma felt something deep about time. Time is a very strange concept and something that science still doesn't fully understand. Moving on to number 7 now, we have horses. This one comes from Pat Laney on Reddit, who said, "ER physician here, had heard many last words from patients, but the creepy one has to be of a man who was on his last breath as he succumbed to renal failure. He said, 'I see a bright light, horses, no eyes, no, no, no,' as he yelled loudly. At this point he was crashing when he suddenly woke up, looked up, and with his last breath he said, 'I understand,' and he died." We know in the medical field that these situations are provoked by a cascade of neurotransmitters in disarray due to tissue and organ failure, but I sometimes have my doubts and perhaps we are seeing more than we are led to believe. That is just one of the strangest things that I've ever heard. Hands down. What were the horses? What did he now understand? Why don't we understand that? I think I got a lot more questions than answers from this story. Coming in at number 6 now, guys, we have Joseph Wright. You may not know his name, but you'll know his creation. Joseph Wright is credited with the editing of the English Dialect Dictionary. It's often regarded as his life work. There are 28 parts made up of 70,000 entries published over the course of 7 years. Another notable thing to mention about Joseph Wright is his famous last words, or should I say word, which was simply dictionary. That was it. According to reports, the man who contributed to one of the most famous dictionaries of all time died after just saying its name one last time. Sort of strange, but also kind of fitting in a way. Moving on now to number 5, we have the top hat. This one comes from a Reddit user who is a nurse. They said, "A nice old lady told my nursing assistant she wanted to wear all white. When asked why, she said, 'The man in black is here.' She looked in the corner of the room. The nursing assistant looked, but there was no one there. That's when I came into the room. We asked her to describe what she was seeing and she said, 'He's all in black and he's got a top hat on.' Then she whispered, 'And his eyes are red,' while her eyes moved across the room directly behind the nursing assistant like she was watching him move closer to us. She died later that night, but it was unexpected. That room creeped me out for a long time after that." Now, some people find it easy to dismiss that as just an old or sick person hallucinating, but others who hear the story are shocked by just how alert the woman seems in the story. She describes his clothes accurately, she watched his movements, and she knew that he had deep red eyes. Who was he? Well, I'm sure we all have a few guesses. Next up at number 4 now, we have Karl Marx. He was a famous German philosopher and political theorist that was the founder of Marxism as we know it. He had been suffering with bronchitis for the last year of his life. When things got really bad, his housekeeper asked him if he had any last words. Marx shouted at her, saying, "Go on, get out. Last words are for fools who haven't said enough." He died shortly after. making his angry quip about last words his own last words. Somewhat fitting. Next up at number 3 now we have SpaghettiOs. Thomas J. Grasso was executed in 1995 for using Christmas tree lights to strangle an 85-year-old woman. His last meal request was for 24 steamed mussels, 24 steamed clams, a Burger King double cheeseburger, 6 barbecue ribs, 2 strawberry milkshakes, 1/2 of a pumpkin pie with whipped cream, diced strawberries, and a 16-ounce can of SpaghettiOs with meatballs served at room temperature. Well, it seems that he got everything, but his SpaghettiOs weren't right. Just before his execution, he was asked for any last words, to which he replied, "I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this." Well, they did, and eventually the whole world did too. Moving on to number 2 now guys, we have eyes. This one comes from a deleted Reddit account who simply said, "My grandfather on his deathbed said, 'They have no eyes.' It still gives me chills." That was posted in a thread asking doctors and nurses what the creepiest last words that they ever heard from patients was. That response had a lot of people saying it was the creepiest thing in the whole thread. Who are they? Is he seeing something or someone? What did he mean by "they have no eyes"? It could be something fairly normal and explainable, or it could be something more terrifying than we can even comprehend. Perhaps the scariest part is that we may never know. And finally, number 1 now, we have Richard B. Mellon. He was an American multimillionaire and president of the Aluminium Company of America. As a kid, he and his brother Andrew had always played tag. Now as they grew up and lived in different places, they continued the game into adulthood and wanted to see how long they could make the other person remain it for. This would involve tagging the other brother before jumping on the train or driving off in a car. Things went on like this for 7 decades. When Richard was on his deathbed, he called over his brother and whispered his final words in his ear, simply saying "last tag" as he touched him. His brother Andrew then remained it until his own death 4 years later.
Starting us off at number 10, we have this. As this audio continued, the pilot's last word was "it's over." The last words will haunt this man's family and friends forever. So that was recorded on the black box of Japan's Airlines Flight 123. It took place back in 1985 in Saudar-Guma Prefecture, which is located in Japan, which is northwest of Tokyo. This flight killed 520 people on board. This accident was one of the deadliest single plane crashes in their history. This flight was on the eve of the Japanese holiday Bon, which is a festival to honor the spirits of one's ancestors. So everyone on this plane was on holiday. Many people were going to go visit their family and friends and loved ones. The pilot noticed an altitude change and he was losing control of the plane. The plane fell 10,000 feet and he continued to send distress calls and asked to be rerouted to Tokyo Airport. But almost 1 hour into the flight, it crashed into Mount Takamaghara. It took 14 hours for rescue crews to locate the plane and try to save as many people as possible. 4 people were able to survive the plane crash. The pilot was not one of them. Number 9. There were many phone calls made during the 9/11 attacks. It was a very devastating day for America and the rest of the world when a terrorist attack unfolded. Well, just minutes before United Airlines Flight 175 slammed into the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, 38-year-old Brian Sweeney made his last phone call. The phone call was made to his wife from the back of the plane. Brian's wife didn't pick up the phone, which is just so heartbreaking to me, but on a voicemail he said, "I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. If things don't go well and it's not looking good, I just want you to know I absolutely love you. I want you to do good. Go have good times. Same to my parents and everyone. I just totally love you. And I'll see you when you get there. Bye babe. I hope I can call you." I don't even know what to say about that. It's extremely a sad situation and a phone message you just never want to listen to. That phone call was placed just 3 minutes before the crash occurred. Moving into number 8, we have this also from the day of the horrific attack.
And there's somebody strapped in business class, and there's We can't breathe in business class. Somebody's got mace or something.
Can you describe the person that you said someone is what in business class?
I'm sitting in the back. Somebody's coming back from business. If you can hold on for 1 second, they're coming back.
So that was from Betty Ann Ung. She was a flight attendant on the plane. She said someone was stabbed, she can't breathe, and thinks she is getting hijacked. Is it just me, or does she sound very, very calm about the whole thing? Betty was on flight 11, which was actually the first plane to become hijacked during the 9/11 attacks. Shortly after the hijacking, Betty notified the American Airlines ground crew, and she stayed on the phone for about 25 minutes. Because of this hijacking, it led to closing the airspace by FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Administration, for the first time in United States history. Number 7. So that was the last audio and video footage of the Brazilian football team that crashed. This took place on November 28, 2016. It was Alemia Flight 2933 that killed 71 of 77 people on board. The Brazilian football team was on their way to play in the 2016 Copa Sudamericana finals. The cause of this flight was unexcusable. It was due to fuel exhaustion, which means there was poor flight planning. And also there was a failure to declare an emergency after fuel levels became critically low. It seems like this accident could have been avoided. I'm sure that there was a massive class action lawsuit in place. Sadly, moving into number 6, we have a woman who texted her dad before her plane crashed. Enda, this girl right here, well, she's 30 years old, and she's actually a former Miss Indonesia finalist who sent her dad Peter one final text message just minutes before she and her husband were killed in a plane crash. The text message said, "Papa, how are you?" Also, Enda sent messages to several of her friends. Enda's father replied to his daughter's text message, but he realized that there was no answer, and then after he realized why, after he watched the news. I would be so heartbroken, I wouldn't know what to do. Enda's plane mysteriously crashed into Perth's Swan River. Investigators are looking into the cause of the accident. Now at number 5, we have this. Alright, good night. That was said by either the pilot or co-pilot on Malaysian Airlines flight 370. This flight actually disappeared, and it's not known if this was intentionally or not, because why would someone flying the plane just say alright, good night, and there doesn't seem to be any distress? All 227 passengers and 12 crew members aboard the plane are presumed dead. The disappearance of flight 370 was the deadliest incident involving a Boeing 777 plane, and the deadliest incident of Malaysian Airlines history. The search for this plane became the most costly of aviation history. Investigators really wanted to know what the heck happened during this flight, but it seems like this will for now remain one of the greatest aviation's mysteries. Number 4.
Mayday, mayday, speed bird, 9595.
That was the black box audio from British Airlines Flight 38. This Boeing 777 plane crashed back in 2008 at the London Heathrow Airport. The cause for the crash was fuel starvation caused by ice. Also, the ice caused a shorter runway to safely land the plane. Fortunately for this plane crash, there was no fatalities. There was 152 people on board and just 47 people sustained injuries. There was one serious injury. This plane was the first Boeing 777 to be written off in their history. In 2009, it was announced that 10 passengers were suing Boeing for the suffering that they had to go through. It was reported that each of the passengers, well, they could receive up to $1 million. The lawsuit alleged that the design of the aircraft was defective and unreasonably dangerous. All of the claims were settled out of court a few years later in 2012. Number 3. That was the last words recorded by the pilot and co-pilot of American Airlines Flight 191. This deadly crash happened on May 25th, 1979 that killed 273 people. The plane crashed due to loss of control that was caused by the engine coming off due to improper maintenance. This flight was going from Chicago, Illinois to Los Angeles International Airport. With 273 fatalities, it was the deadliest aviation accident to have occurred in the United States. There were no survivors. Number 2.
Morning, do you want to go to Tamiami and land? You have a door open? Is that what you're saying?
I have a door ajar and a passenger that fell down. I am 6 miles from Tamiami.
That was a mayday call from the pilot of Piper PA-46 aircraft. This plane was about 2,000 feet in the air when a passenger fell out of the plane. Coast Guard and Miami-Dade Fire Rescue and Water United searched for the missing person. The Miami-Dade Police Department sent homicide detectives to the airport to further investigate what happened. Police have not indicated any evidence of foul play, so it was most likely an accident. But I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't be that calm if a passenger just fell out of my plane. Finally, at number 1, this one is insane. You are about to listen to an audio from a Horizon Air employee, Richard Russell, who decided to steal a plane and take it for a flight.
Ruin your day.
Just flying the plane around, you seem comfortable with that?
Oh, hell yeah, it's a blast, man. I played video games before, so I know what I'm doing a little bit.
Is this real life right now? This guy is absolutely insane. Apparently Richard Russell was described as a suicidal man, so he didn't care what he was doing. He decided he wanted to steal a plane and fly it wherever he wanted. Richard Russell did crash the plane, but just before the air traffic control was trying to help him, air traffic control was trying to help him land the plane safely. Richard knew that what he did might result in some jail time, so he wasn't really interested in landing the plane.
I think I'm going to try to do a barrel roll, and if that goes good, then I'm just going to nose down and call it a night.
Well, Rich, before you do that, let's think about this. I got another pilot coming up, Pilot Joel, here in just a minute or two, I hope.
This is the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next most amazing top 10 video.